It's not just women and children that are repressed in these countries. You would never want the government to find out you're gay.
In a society where radical Islam rules, gays are seen to be people with a contagious disease, a very bad disease.
هذا فساد كبير. هذا فساد كبير.
Sometimes we are blunt. When the Islamic ruling system is established, like you said, we're gonna give them a choice. We're gonna consult them, give them choice of therapy, and tell them to abandon their homosexual lifestyle. And if they don't, either leave, or if you wanna be here, then you're gonna be face the punishment as a criminal.
Punishment?
Of throwing off a cliff when you have a homosexual sodomy.
معنى زواج المثلين زواج الذكر مع الذكر والأنثى مع الأنثى. وهذه مصيبة كبرى ومحرمة في الإسلام جملة وتفصيلا، بل يقتل الذي يقوم بزواج المثل، يقتلان، اثنين يقتلون بأسرع وقت، بل يحرقون.
من وجدتموه يعمل عمل قوم لوط فاقتلوا الفاعل والمفعول.
The faces of Iraq's persecuted gays are too many to show. They've been shot, burned alive. In some cases, their heads were severed. Here, a gay man being beaten to death.
If you look at countries like Iran, they flog them and they hang them. And that's only because you're gay.
In Iran, we don't have homosexuals like in your country. We don't have that in our country.
Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. There are over 1.3 billion adherents, and it's also thought to be the fastest growing religion in America. One of the most common questions I get when I speak to audiences around the country is, what % of Muslims in America are radical? And the Pew poll in 2007 actually provided some staggering numbers about that.
In a hair-raising number, the Pew Research Center reports on a new poll that as many as 1 in 4 young American Muslims condone suicide bombings against civilians, at least sometimes.
Nearly 25% of Muslims, 25 under 30, found suicide bombings to defend their religion as acceptable.
So you're talking about just about 200,000 folks who believe in suicide bombing. What do you make of this, Steve?
Well, I think the numbers are absolutely frightening. Unfortunately, the mainstream, in quotes, American Muslim leadership has been in denial.
What's happening? Where's the disconnect? What's the influence there?
The influence is basically political Islam, which is you have sermons that are not being given about the love of God. They're hearing about every plight to blame the West, and in exchange, they have nothing to offer other than hate.
As we move further and further away from September 11, 2001, as we remain safe during that period, there are going to be increasing number of people who either don't see the threat as clearly, or their psychological makeup is going to want them to wish it away.
It is definitely here. I don't want to overstate the problem, but there is a danger of understating the problem of homegrown Islamist terrorism. And the fact is, we have now had a series of cases that have thankfully been broken.
But yes, 7 people have been arrested in the Miami area. Officials say the plotters were in the early stages of planning an attack on the Sears Tower in Chicago.
They hoped for their attacks to be, quote, just as good or greater than 9/11.
Police arrested 6 men and charged them with planning to attack the Fort Dix Army base.
This is a new kind of terrorism. It is not only coming from outside the United States in, but it is also growing inside our own country.
Time magazine says Al-Qaeda was planning a cyanide attack, which could have killed thousands.
From what I last heard, the U.S. government has stopped over 31 attacks against the U.S. since 9/11.
These homegrown terrorists may prove to be as dangerous as groups like Al-Qaeda, if not more so.
You've seen the Torrance, California case where they were in the operational stages of completing planning to attack U.S. military recruiting stations and then conduct a massacre at a synagogue in West Los Angeles. They were 60 days from their target date, and really all they had left to do was to start killing.
Make no mistake about it. We dodged a bullet here, perhaps many bullets.
Within a few months of that, you saw the plot to attack the PATH trains that run under the streets of New York City.
A terrorist plot in the early stages has been broken up. It was allegedly a plot to blow up one of the commuter railway tunnels running from New Jersey to New York under the Hudson River.
The thinking within that conspiracy that they would actually be able to collapse the tunnels, flood part of lower Manhattan. Within the same time period, of course, you have in Great Britain the 7/7 bombing, the 7/21 bombing, and the British planes plot, which was to blow up a dozen airliners over Atlantic routes with American passengers headed for the United States.
The intelligence suggested that this was to be achieved by means of concealed explosive devices smuggled onto the aircraft in hand baggage.
This was intended to be mass murder on an unimaginable scale.
If all of these attacks were prevented, and you walk away saying that somehow the threat has passed, we're no longer in danger, I'd like to look at the analytical tool you're using. The threat is certainly there.
The major funding of terror is definitely oil.
Saudi Arabia is making hundreds of billions of dollars every year in oil revenues. And in 2006, for example, they made over $150 billion. Now, where is the money being used?
They use this money for a variety of purposes, one of which is for the dissemination of their peculiar version of Islam.
Well, the Saudis probably in the past years have come to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to set up madrasas in Pakistan.
It is also used to fund and arm the terrorist movements.
It's not a coincidence that 15 of the 19 hijackers were of Saudi origin.
Well, the United States uses about a quarter of the world's oil, with under 5% of its people.
Americans use 400 million gallons of gasoline every day. Rising prices take a lot of money out of the American pocketbook.
So when you and I pull into the gasoline pump, we probably ought to turn the mirror a little bit and look ourselves in the eye for just a second before we get out and get the credit card out to charge. Because if we want to know who is paying for these madrasas around the world that are teaching little 8-year-old boys to be suicide bombers and teaching the passionate hatred of Jews and Shiites and oppression of everyone else and so on, you and I are, as we pay for that gasoline.
In today's context, there are actually two different types of jihad. There's the violent jihad, where the Islamists use violence and terror to try to overthrow their enemy. And then there's what has been termed the cultural jihad, where these Islamists use in a most duplicitous way the laws and the rights they are given in our society to try to work against society and overthrow it.
We think that Saudi Arabia's principal export is oil. It's not, it's ideology. All oil does is enable them to have the money to export the ideology.
In 2004,